When he stepped into the courtroom, even the seasoned officers lifted their heads, not because he slammed the door or barked a threat, because of the laugh, a coarse, unfiltered laugh that bounced off the wood panels like a dare. It didn't belong in a place built on order. It was supposed to be a dull morning. Parking citations, noise complaints, a couple of rolling stop tickets. Folks sat waiting with folded summonses and tired patience. Yet the moment he walked in, everything shifted. His grin stretched too wide for someone facing fines. His shoulders hung loose, hands planted deep in his pockets, as if the courtroom were a barn he'd wandered into by mistake. He wore farm clothes, stiff canvas jacket, boots dusted with soil, but carried them like armor. Not decorative, not fancy. Functional. And somehow that only sharpened the arrogance in the way he stood. A few older folks traded whispers. "He thinks this is entertainment." Judge Caprio began the hearing as he always did, measured tone, eyes steady. But the young man cut in with a breezy line that hung awkwardly in the air. "Your rules work here. Out on the land, they don't mean a thing." A murmur rolled through the room. Not outrage, confusion. Was he serious? Caprio raised an eyebrow. "Sir, you're here for a speeding violation and for parking a commercial vehicle where they're prohibited. Why are you laughing?" The young man didn't blink. "Because I know you won't do anything." That statement tore through the courtroom like a cold gust. The officer near the wall shifted his stance. A woman holding her grandson shook her head in disbelief. And from the second row, the defendant's mother, gray hair pinned neatly, posture small, lowered her eyes as if bracing for impact. Caprio flipped a page in the file. His expression changed. Not much, just enough for tension to thicken. "It appears," he said slowly, "your record flagged another incident. One you didn't mention." The young man's smile faltered. Just a flicker, but it was the first real crack. Caprio leaned back slightly, studying him not like a reckless kid, but like a puzzle missing a piece. "This doesn't look like coincidence," the judge said, voice calm but edged with intent. "It looks like a pattern, and I want to understand why you're acting this way." His confidence thinned the moment the judge asked why. Not about the violation, about him. It caught him off guard, and for the first time he stood a little less firmly, as though the floorboards weren't as steady as he assumed. He came from one of the biggest farming operations in the state, a name spoken with irritation in town halls and with deference out in the rural stretches. His family owned fields that stretched past the horizon, barns packed with machinery older than he was, and contracts with markets that fed half the county. Out there, authority carried no badge. Bueno came from land, muscle, and legacy. To him, city rules felt like decorations, letters on signs that didn't change a harvest or mend a broken combine. He grew up where police rarely made it past the gravel road, where disagreements were settled with calloused hands or a stern word. Paperwork meant trouble. Regulations meant someone far away was meddling. No wonder the idea of proper procedure seemed distant. But the courtroom didn't see the mornings that started at 4:30, when the air stung with cold and animals needed tending before sunrise. It didn't see the tractors that failed when the bank statements already looked grim. And it didn't see the weight he'd been carrying since his father's heart attack 2 months earlier, an event that carved a line across his life, forcing him to step into shoes built for someone twice his age. His smirk now looked less like mockery and more like the thin shell of someone afraid to show how much he was unraveling. Caprio studied him again. "You seem tired," he said, not as an accusation, but an observation. The young man stiffened, jaw tightening. Then the judge asked the question no one expected. "What are you afraid of?" The words landed like a stone. A few people leaned forward. The young man blinked sharply, caught between anger and confusion. Fear? Him? Before he could respond, his mother rose slowly from her seat. Her hands trembled as she addressed the judge. "He laughs when he's nervous," she said softly. "He's not trying to insult anyone. He hasn't rested in weeks." Her son shot her a look, pleading, frustrated. But she didn't sit. She revealed what he didn't, the night the driver quit after a bitter argument, leaving him to deliver produce alone. The confrontation that ended with him hauling crates across town by himself, racing deadlines he could no longer keep. She explained how he'd taken over everything at once: fieldwork, payroll, negotiations, because his father wasn't strong enough to return to the fields. Murmurs shifted in tone. Some faces softened, others hardened. Understanding didn't erase wrongdoing, but it complicated the picture. Caprio turned a page in the folder. "This citation happened during that delivery?" he asked. The young man hesitated, then nodded once. "And the previous incident?" A flash of defensiveness crossed his face, brief, raw. The judge closed the folder gently. "This is no longer just about violations," he said. "It's about you, and what you're trying so hard to hide." Those words hung heavy in the room, an invisible weight neither the defendant nor his mother seemed prepared to lift. The judge's words still hung in the air when Caprio reached for a remote and aimed it at the monitor beside the bench. The screen flickered, then steadied into a grainy video feed from a city camera. The courtroom leaned in. The footage showed the young man's truck swinging into a no-parking zone outside the community food center. He didn't simply stop illegally. He jumped out, gesturing sharply at someone just out of frame. When the staff member came into view, the argument was unmistakable. He refused to show paperwork, stepped too close, and jabbed a finger toward the crates. The tension on screen was enough to silence even the whispers in the room. Caprio let the clip run another few seconds before pausing it. "You told me nothing significant happened," he said, voice low but steady. "This looks quite different." The defendant's shoulders rose and fell with a quick, tight breath. For the first time there was no grin, no pretense, only strain. "He started questioning where the produce came from," he said. "We hadn't updated our certifications yet. They're still pending." His voice quivered at the tail end, a subtle shift, but impossible to miss. The courtroom reacted in ripples, soft gasps, exchanged looks. The stakes were suddenly clear. Outdated certifications could threaten the farm's contracts, even its survival. And he knew it. As he spoke, his hands, those sturdy, work-worn hands, began to tremble slightly. He clasped them together, as though forcing stillness. Before the judge could respond, a man from the back row rose abruptly. "That's him!" he called out. He wore a center employee badge clipped to his jacket. The room startled. Even the bailiff straightened. "I was there," the man continued, stepping forward a little. He yelled so loud the kids in the lobby flinched. He scared people. Tell them that part. The defendant's eyes shut for half a second, as though the accusation struck someplace already bruised. Caprio held up a hand to restore order, but even with quiet restored, a different kind of noise filled the room. The collective judgment, thick and sharp. The judge's gaze settled on the young man again. Is he telling the truth? A long pause. Then, barely audible, yes. Not defiant. Not resigned. Just honest. Caprio leaned forward, elbows on the bench, studying the young man with a weight that made the silence feel heavier. "What I see here," he said, "isn't just a parking violation. It's losing control. Whether out of pressure or pride, that's what we're uncovering." Those words landed with precision, hitting the very nerve the defendant had been trying to hide. The judge exhaled slowly. "There is one document I need to see," he said. "If you bring it, we may resolve this today. If you don't, the consequences will extend beyond fines." The young man's eyes widened for a split second, enough to reveal that he understood exactly which document Caprio meant, and that whatever was written inside it was something he'd kept even from his mother. A hush swept the room as he nodded stiffly and turned toward the exit, the sound of his boots echoing with a tension that hadn't been there when he swaggered in. When he returned, the swagger was gone. The door groaned softly as he pushed it open, and the courtroom watched him cross the aisle with a manila folder clutched against his chest, not shield-like, but as something fragile he was afraid to drop. His boots no longer struck the floor with confidence. They dragged ever so slightly. He handed the folder to the bailiff, who passed it to Judge Caprio. The judge opened it, expecting the usual paperwork tied to transport or licensing. Instead, his eyes narrowed. The pages weren't routine. They were urgent. A sanitary inspection report, freshly dated, detailed, and grim. It listed violations in stark, unemotional language, contamination risks in the wash station, substandard temperature logs, machinery overdue for servicing. Then, highlighted in red, a final line. Failure to correct within 30 days will result in partial shutdown. The document did not accuse. It warned. And the warning was a countdown. A hum spread through the courtroom, the kind born from people suddenly understanding the scope of something they thought was small. Even those who disapproved of the young man's behavior couldn't deny the seriousness on the page. Farms didn't just lose revenue after a shutdown. They lost entire seasons. Caprio read longer than usual. He rested the report on the bench, fingertips tapping once, quiet but telling. The young man drew a breath and stepped forward. His voice lacked the bravado he arrived with. It carried only exhaustion. "I didn't want him," he gestured toward the food center staffer, "to report us. We're behind on repairs. I've been trying to fix everything before my father sees that notice." He paused, searching for the right words, and found none graceful. "I thought if I pushed hard enough, I could make the problems disappear." It wasn't an excuse. It was an admission. His mother rose again, slower this time, as if age had weighed heavier in the last hour. "He isn't laughing at the law," she said quietly. "He laughs when he's overwhelmed. It's how he keeps from falling apart." The room stilled. She continued, voice trembling just once. "His brother died on the farm. A piece of machinery failed. My son was the one running it that day. He's carried that guilt ever since. He thinks he has to do the work of 2 men because of it." The revelation didn't spark sympathy so much as silence, deep, sober silence, the kind that settles when truth finally replaces assumptions. The young man didn't deny her words. He stared at the floor, jaw clenched, but his resistance had dissolved. Caprio closed the folder and folded his hands. "You're under pressure no one your age should shoulder alone," he said. "But weight is not a license to tear into others. Responsibility doesn't grant permission to wound." There was no anger in his tone, just gravity. He continued, "Before I make any ruling, I'll need additional testimony. There's more to understand before this can be resolved." As if on cue, the courtroom doors opened again. A man in a city-issued jacket stepped inside, holding a clipboard. He scanned the room until he saw the young man, then nodded faintly, as though acknowledging a shared moment neither wanted to revisit. Caprio recognized him immediately, a representative from the health department, the very person who'd conducted the inspection noted in the report. He approached the bench. "Your Honor," he said, "I was at the farm 2 days ago. I think it's important I speak to what I saw." The judge gestured for him to continue, but the witness hadn't yet revealed whether he came to condemn or defend, and the room leaned forward, suspended between both possibilities. The health department representative stepped closer, adjusting his glasses as though steadying both his thoughts and the weight of what he was about to say. The courtroom was silent except for the faint hum of the overhead lights. When we arrived for the inspection, he began. He was the only one on site. No crew, no supervisor, just him. And he wasn't ignoring the issues. We found him trying to repair the wash line himself. He looked worn down, determined, but stretched thin. A few people in the gallery shifted, surprised by the gentleness in the man's tone. He worked late, the representative continued. Long after we finished our report, he asked questions, tried to figure out what he could fix without shutting the whole operation down. He wasn't careless. He was overwhelmed. The words reshaped the room's mood once more, pulling judgment into uncertainty, irritation into uneasy understanding. Judge Caprio listened without interrupting. When the testimony ended, he turned his attention to the young man. No sternness now, just a steady, piercing calm. You weren't reckless because you're arrogant, Caprio said. You were reckless because you've forgotten where the line is between strength and stubbornness. The young man swallowed, throat working visibly. Caprio's voice softened, but carried unmistakable authority. You pushed yourself until you had nothing left, and then you pushed harder. And in that space, where exhaustion becomes pride, you hurt the people around you. The defendant's composure wavered. A shadow flickered behind his eyes, something he had held back for years. He drew a breath, then another, and finally spoke in a tone stripped of every performance. My brother died because I didn't check the safety latch. He trusted me. And He stopped, unable to continue, until he forced the words out. After the accident, I told myself I could never slip again. But the harder I try to be perfect, the worse I get. His mother covered her mouth, shoulders trembling. He continued, voice rough. I've been running the harvest, fixing equipment, driving deliveries, handling bank calls. I thought if I admitted I needed help, I'd fail everyone again. So I kept going until I couldn't tell if I was doing good or just doing damage. The courtroom absorbed his confession without a single whisper. Then a voice from the gallery, a sharp, older voice, broke the quiet. Hard life doesn't excuse yelling at people. Several nodded. Others shushed her. The room teetered between compassion and accountability. Caprio let the tension settle before responding. They're right, he said. Pain doesn't wipe away consequences. But growth is impossible if we punish honesty with nothing but more punishment. He reached for the citation forms, tapping the corner against the bench. Here's my ruling, he announced, and the room drew still again. The parking violation is dismissed. The speeding offense receives the lowest applicable fine. A faint wave of relief crossed the young man's face, brief, almost guilty. But, Caprio continued, you will spend the next 30 days volunteering at the community food center, the very place where you lost your temper. You will lift boxes, serve meals, and look people in the eye. Not as a farmer or a defendant, but as someone who needs reminding that burden does not make you bigger than others. The young man inhaled sharply, caught between humiliation and gratitude. This is not punishment, the judge added. It's a reset. The defendant straightened. For once, his voice did not shake. Thank you, Your Honor. I will do it. Caprio raised a hand, steady and unwavering. Don't try. Do it. The statement landed with a gravity that lingered long after the echo faded. The next morning, long before the center's doors opened, he stood outside with sleeves rolled up, and the same crates he once delivered in frustration stacked beside him. There was no audience, no courtroom pressure, just the quiet judgment of the workers who recognized him the moment he walked in. Nobody welcomed him. Nobody needed to. He nodded once, stepped inside, and began unloading produce without waiting for instruction. The rhythmic scrape of boxes against the floor filled the room, grounding him in a task that didn't demand perfection, only presence. Midway through sorting, A small hand tugged at his jacket. He looked down to see a boy, no older than 8, studying him with wide, cautious eyes. The same child who had recoiled during the confrontation outside the center. "My mom said you're not mean," the boy whispered. "She said you were just tired." For a moment, the young man couldn't respond. The simplicity of the statement cut deeper than any reprimand. He managed a quiet nod, then surprised himself with a faint, unforced smile, the first one in months that didn't mask anything. He kept working through the morning, stacking shelves, hauling bags, sweeping corners nobody noticed. And with each task, the memory of Judge Caprio's final words echoed through his thoughts, steady as a metronome. Law isn't there to break you. It's there to keep you from breaking yourself. By noon, sweat darkened the collar of his shirt, and dust clung to his hands. Yet something in his posture had changed. He moved with intention, not panic, with humility, not defensiveness. Just as he was finishing the last pallet, his phone buzzed. His mother's name lit the screen. He answered, expecting a simple check-in. Instead, her voice came strained. "There's another inspection on the farm. They're pulling equipment apart. It's serious. You need to come." The familiar dread pressed against his ribs, but this time it didn't swallow him whole. He looked toward the food center entrance, toward the people who had watched him rebuild himself one small task at a time, then toward the road leading home. "I'm coming," he said quietly, "and I'm not running from it anymore." He thanked the supervisor, returned his work apron, and stepped outside into the sharp midday light. The city hummed around him, indifferent yet steady, a reminder that life didn't pause for anyone's turmoil. He paused at the curb, taking one final breath before heading to the truck. The wind carried the scent of freshly cut produce, mingling with asphalt and distant salt from the bay. A strange mix, but honest. Real. As he climbed into the driver's seat, a single narration-like thought settled over him. Not loud, not triumphant, but true. Every person carries their own law. But the real judgment comes afterward, when you decide who you'll be once the dust settles. The engine rumbled to life. No dramatic exit, no turning heads, just a young man driving toward a future he wasn't sure of, but no longer feared. And though the story paused there, the sense of it continued, like a field, waiting for the next season, knowing something has changed in the soil.